my classes in 1985. There are graduates, there are undergraduates, there are people who take our student teachers as interns in their programs. We have people here from Truman College and from Harper and from Oakton and from all these wonderful institutions that have worked with us over the years. And it's an incredible honor. I'm deeply, deeply moved. And thank you to all of you, to my wonderful colleagues, to my wonderful students, to my family. You've all held my hand all the way along. So, with that said, my talk today is about politics and pedagogy. I look at teaching as a very, very political act, as many of you know. So I will share with you some of my ideas, some of my values, just in the hope that we as teachers, we're out there to make the world a better place, and in the hope that some of these ideas will resonate with you. The talk is dedicated to all of my students over the last 40 years. Thank you for being here with me. So last month, the College of Arts and Sciences sponsored a forum for the faculty of our college to talk about ways that we can make our pedagogy meaningful in terms of social justice, in terms of poverty and hunger and racism and so on. And as we engaged in the discussion, I kept thinking about what we in my profession do as language teachers. So let me share with you a few things. First of all, who are our students here at Northeastern? And the same students we have here, many of my colleagues at the sister institutions, you have similar students. Many of them are first-generation Americans. Many of them have parents who never went to college. Many of them have parents who never went to high school or even grammar school. So they're faced with special challenges. Many have parents who don't speak English, or may speak it but not very well, parents who can't help them with their homework, even if the parents are native speakers of English. So many of our students come from lower socioeconomic status, and they're at risk in all sorts of ways. And for me, it's an exciting challenge, as so many of you know. It's a very exciting challenge. So, some statistics. Last year, fall of 2012, 74% of our entering freshmen were from the Chicago public schools, where sometimes the education is okay and sometimes it's not. Of that class, we had a 60% retention rate. So what happened to the 40%? I want to talk about that a little bit, of things that we can do to maybe make that number smaller in future years. Let me share some other statistics with you. 3-year-olds from higher income groups knew 5 times as many words as their lower income peers. By age 3 already, you're behind in certain ways. Why is that? A lot of the research shows that parent-child interaction is different from social class to social class. The difference has already started. By first grade, children from higher socioeconomic status knew approximately twice as many words as their peers from lower socioeconomic status. You're at a disadvantage learning how to read when you don't have vocabulary. Class differences in children's vocabulary skills at an early age are likely to remain stable or even increase over time. So programs like Head Start, which are wonderful, it's not that they close the gap, but they at least hold it steady rather than letting these children fall further behind. Another appalling statistic. In a 4-year period, the child raised in a professional family hears about 11 million words. The child raised in a working class family hears about 6 million words. And the welfare child hears about 3 million words. Huge difference. And the next 2 facts I'm going to present are old, but they're still holding steady today, I'm sad to say. Strong 3rd graders had vocabularies about equal to lower performing 12th graders. So the 3rd grader in a school maybe in Wilmette, think about that student and think about the high school student from Clemente or these schools where there are challenges. It's heartbreaking. High school seniors near the top of their class knew about 4 times as many words as their lower performing classmates. So it sounds dismal, but the fact remains that there are things that we can do, and that's what I really want to talk about today. What are some simple things that we can do? It's my belief that this is a problem that's not just the problem of the ESL teacher and not just a problem of the English teacher. It's everybody's problem. But the good news is there are things that we can do. So let's talk about vocabulary a little bit. What does it mean? First of all, words have multiple meanings. So often I'll teach a word to my students and they say, oh, I know that. Well, they may know one meaning, they may even know several, but they may not know all the rich, subtle nuances. For example, the word fine. It can mean very good, as in you should be really proud you did a fine job. Or it can mean, okay, that's enough. Do you want more cream? No, this is fine. It can also mean, well, if I have to, whatever, as in, yeah, fine, I'll do it. And notice the intonation on that. That's something that's not automatically a given for everybody. It can mean very fine print, okay, very small. Very thin is a fine strand of hair. Small in terms of grains, small grains of sand. A fine can be a sum of money, a noun. It can be a verb, to fine somebody, to cause them to pay a certain amount of money. Knowing vocabulary doesn't mean just knowing lots of words. It's not just, oh, if I study for the SATs or the GREs and know lots of words, I'm going to do well. It's really knowing the subtlety of all the various meanings of, or the various senses of a word. So what are some of the things we need to talk about when we talk about vocabulary with our students? Well, you need to know about pronunciation. You need to know the correct intonation. You did a fine job. It's really different from, yeah, fine, I'll do it. Huge difference. You need to know spelling. You need to know synonyms. Fine means excellent. It means okay. It means all sorts of things. If there are antonyms, you need to know the antonyms. Fine does have antonyms, but a word like table doesn't. You need to know the level of formality of a word. Fine is really different from sweet or bitchin' or whatever you want to say. They're different. You need to know. So many of our students don't know what that appropriate level is. You need to know the strength of a word, how it fits into a gradation of meanings. For example, a good job versus a fine job versus a magnificent job. What do you want your boss to be telling you? You need to know about something called collocations. Collocations are something that linguists talk about a lot. Collocations are words that go together in a highly frequent manner. They occur all the time. And it's not a logical kind of thing, so it's not something you just know. You need to be taught this if you're not a native speaker of the language. So we can talk about fine print. You can talk about paying a fine. You can talk about a library fine. You can talk about a parking fine, a stiff fine. You can say something's mighty fine. You can talk about fine hair. You can say, how are you? Oh, fine, thanks, and you? And all of those are collocations, ways of saying things that we say it in English. And so many of our students, and I mean native speakers as well as non-native speakers, don't have this kind of knowledge. We need to provide it. Another thing we need to know is parts of speech. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? We need to know the grammar of the word. What kinds of prefixes and suffixes, for example, go together? The morphology. Take the word possible. You say unpossible or impossible. I have just as many students who think it's impossible as impossible. They need to be taught. It's impossible. Take the word capable. Is it capableness or capability? Which student is going to go farther? It's the student that has this kind of information, that has ready access to that kind of information. We have to teach it. In the 1980s, a lot of you know that linguists said, "No, all you have to do is read a lot, and you'll be fine." Excuse the expression. It's not true, though. reading is wonderful. I'm certainly not putting it down. It's a very valuable piece of how we acquire knowledge, and knowledge specifically about language. But you also need to focus attention on vocabulary. We need to have focused vocabulary instruction. It matters terribly. And we need to have not just breadth of knowledge, I know lots of words, we need to have depth of knowledge. Our students need to know the nuances of the language. So then the question is, what kinds of words do they need to know? Linguists would divide vocabulary into 4 types, okay? In 1953, a man named Michael West put together a list of 2,000 words which he considered highly useful and highly frequent and absolutely essential to surviving in English. It's called the General Service List. You can Google it. I did. I have a little packet of those words. Absolutely essential for anybody who's going to survive in this country. Words like table, chair, understand, teacher, and, to, for, very, very basic kinds of things, but absolutely essential, building blocks. You need to know them, and you need to know them well. So that's very high priority. The high-frequency words, the General Service List, or GSL as we call it, comprise approximately 80% of a typical academic text. 80%. Okay? Is that enough? That's the question. There's another group of words. In 2001, a linguist in New Zealand named Averil Coxhead put together a list of words based on the General Service, going beyond that, of academic words, words that she considered essential to reading an academic text or to writing about an academic subject, but words that aren't related to any specific academic field per se. So in the academic word list, you might have words like core, analyze, neutral, positive, negative, impact, aspect, equate, achieve, initial. Important words, very important words. You can't read an academic text without knowing them. A little bit harder than the GSL, but absolutely crucial. Those words comprise 9 to 10% of a typical academic text. So beyond that, we're building priorities now. General Service List is an absolute must. Academic word list, it's an absolute must if you're going to survive academically. And I don't mean just in college. I mean by 4th grade you need a lot of this vocabulary. Technical words. In every field we have technical vocabulary, such as integer or vector or standard deviation for math, hydrocarbon, cathode, electrode, electrolytes, whatever, for chemistry. In my field, we talk about language in the brain, corpus callosum, cortex, prefrontal cortex, things like that. Important to me, but not necessarily important in your field. So each one of us has a separate set of technical vocabulary that we need to impart to our students. Okay? And then there's another kind of word. Hirsutorufus. Anybody know what that means? I bet my husband does, but I bet nobody else does. It's got something to do with it's being red-headed. And Agamphius. Needed that one, didn't you? Agamphius, you know what that is? Means toothless. You know where your philtrum is. It's not on your car. Stay close to the mic. Okay. It's that groove underneath your nose. Do you need to know those words? Say no. No. You really don't. And yet I see lots and lots of students being given lists of words like that to memorize. And I go, oh, no, don't do that. And I see teachers thinking that they're helping their students, that their students will sound educated. To be honest, the words occur so infrequently that they're probably not using them correctly because they haven't seen them enough times to really know how these words work. You need to know a word to see it in action maybe a dozen times or so before you really know how to use it. You probably don't need it other than maybe taking some, GRE, something like that. Not particularly useful. That's at the bottom of the list. Okay? We need to prioritize. It's not that you shouldn't know words like serpentine or bombastic or loquacious. Those are good words, but they're not your first priority. And many of our students need to learn things that are far more basic than that. All right, take a look, if you will, at that passage. You'll be tested on it, guys. Are you ready? Do you know any of the words? You think you could figure out what those words are? Do you have enough context? Enough context to do so? Do you know the parts of speech? Which words are in past tense? What's the main idea of the paragraph? Don't know it, do you? You shouldn't. If you do, you're really incredible. You know 80% of that vocabulary. Is 80% enough for you to make sense of it? Absolutely not. Remember, the GSL comprises about 80% of an academic text. So clearly, just knowing the GSL isn't enough. All right? So you failed that test, but I'm glad. What about that one? Can you do it? Can you make some educated guesses about things? What's it about? It's a study about dreams, what languages people dream in, etc. You know 95% of the vocabulary. 95% is what linguists have determined is what you need to know minimally. To maybe get a C on the test, you need to know 95% of the vocabulary. That's minimal. To really, really read and know what you're reading about and do better than a C on the test and maybe enjoy what you're reading, heaven forfend, you need to know 98% of the vocabulary, 98%. How many of you have studied a language, whether it be English or a foreign language, and looked at texts that looked like this and said, oh my gosh, it's too hard. It's too hard, you're right. It's too hard. So we now know that you need to know 98%, minimally 95%, to know what you're doing. So let's look at our students. And there are a lot of my students in this room, and they know I love them dearly. I am talking in the aggregate about a student body. I took some statistics from a basic level ESL class that I had a couple of years ago. And there's a test that we administer to determine how much of the academic word list they know, how much of the general service list they know. And I just listed it here for you. I ranked them. So now remember, you need to know about 95%. All right. So, first couple of people, not so bad, right? About 5 of these people, they might do okay. What about people down here? Look at what they know. This is a typical freshman class. Oh my God, as my kids would say. They're going to struggle. They're at risk. We either do something about it or they're going to disappear from our classes. So, let's take a look at some students. I took 2 students. I have about 8 years worth of data that I collected, having tested students at our English language program. And I kind of went into the files and I pulled things out. So here's student number 1, somebody I didn't know personally. She came here as a freshman with the general service, with her general service vocabulary was at 53%. By the end of the semester, her exit score was 63%. That's the general service list. That's basic words, table, chair, teacher, and of 4. Academic word list, an entry score of 3, an exit score of 25. What do you think happened to her? She didn't come back. She dropped out. Student number 2. She came, this is somebody I did know, somebody who was in my class. She came with an entry score, general service list of 67, which is a little iffy. She left with an exit score of 93. Her academic word list was 53 in the beginning and 73 by the time she left that first semester class. okay? A nice jump of 20 points. If she keeps on getting the kind of vocabulary enrichment that we gave her, she's going to fly. So where do you think she is today? She's here. She's finishing up at Northeastern. Yes. And she has a 3.52 grade point average. She has she got a B in English 101. She's making it. What's the difference is she knew enough words. She knew enough words, and we worked on it. You know what my suggestion is? Work on it. All right. I should mention one thing. These scores I'm giving you are all what we call receptive scores. There are two ways of looking at vocabulary. Well, there's lots of ways of looking at vocabulary. One dichotomy is receptive ability, which means I can recognize a word when I see it. I might recognize it when I read it. And then there's productive vocabulary, which means I could use it adequately in a sentence. And productive is always harder than receptive. If you look at people's scores, it's always lower when you get to productive. I'm giving you receptive scores. Students' ability to read English. What happens when they have to write in English? You can imagine if their receptive scores are at this level, what are their productive scores like? What's their ability to use words effectively in written English? Minimal, unless we do something. So let's do something. So you know some things about vocabulary. You know, for example, that we have these 4 classes of vocabulary. There are other things we could be doing for our students, okay? One of them is teaching them about good dictionaries. Not all dictionaries are equal. Linguists have developed, there are 2 kinds of dictionaries in particular that I think are particularly useful for at-risk students. One of them is called a learner's dictionary. For those of you who are interested, I have some sitting at the table there. They're underneath that brown bag. I didn't have room up here to bring them up. But a learner's dictionary is a dictionary that's compiled by linguists. Thanks, Wamushi. That's my favorite, the Collins Co-Build. The second one is a collocation dictionary. Okay, these are gold mines for students, native speakers, non-native speakers. A learner's dictionary provides you with explanations in English, but in English at the appropriate level. So often, those of us who love learning foreign languages, you know that if you look at a typical monolingual dictionary, a Webster's dictionary, or the equivalent in another language, so you look up a word, and there are about 3 words in the definition that you don't know, so you start working up those words, and you never get to the bottom of it. You'd never know what you're doing. A learner's dictionary is based scientifically so that it's explained in vocabulary at the level that's needed. It is a treasure for students who are at risk. I've actually abandoned using regular dictionaries. I prefer the learner dictionaries. I think they give better explanations. They also give you information about things that I talked about earlier, about level of formality, where a word might be used. Is it rude to use this word? Is it used only in Britain? Is it used only in Texas? Is it used wherever? A treasure trove of information in simple English that is much more accessible to students who struggle with the language. And then there's the collocation dictionary that talks about which words go together. So students writing a paper and they want to write, they need to know things like you deliver a speech. You don't do a speech, you deliver a speech. I've had so many students say, I'm going to do a speech next week. No, you're going to deliver it. They'll say something like highly predictable, okay? Not tightly predictable, not large, well, maybe largely, so. You demonstrate a preference. You crack a joke. Where'd you get that from? These aren't things you could know in your head because there's no logic behind it. But a collocation dictionary gives you that kind of information. This is something that we want our students to know. It's a wonderful, wonderful investment. I highly encourage people to go for it. Something else, and this is something that is covered in many classes, even way before kids get to college level, is word parts. Un means negative, pre means before, ER tells you who or what did something, the agent, write, writer, read, reader. TION makes a word a noun, ABLE makes it an adjective, so many of our students don't know that. We need to teach it. Simple as that. All right. So, you know about collocations, you know about learner dictionaries, you know about the way we classify vocabulary, that we need to make judgments about what we need to teach our students. One other thing that I would like to mention is there's a wonderful website. I don't have it down in the handout, and sorry about that. It's called Lex Tutor, LEXTUTOR. You can Google it. And Lex Tutor will give you sets of tests that you can use to test your students' vocabulary. It will give you tons of information about collocations and so on and so forth. Take a look. It's really worth it. It's an incredible treasure trove of things you can do. So, we know that students need to focus more on vocabulary. We know that we need to prioritize, that they first need to know the GSL, the General Service List. We know that they then need to know the AWL, the Academic Word List. It's not necessarily, I won't do one until I know the other, but we know that this is the general pathway, and they need technical knowledge, and we can really leave behind the fancy words until much later. In sum, in order to succeed, our students need adequate lexical development. They're not going to make it. You saw those statistics. It's the responsibility of every teacher, not just the English teachers, not just the ESL teachers, everybody. Lexicon is a very powerful tool for fighting against poverty. It really can make a difference. Think about student number 2. And I leave you with the words of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I never forget that we're sowing winter wheat, which the coming spring will see sprout, and other hands than ours will reap and enjoy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You knew I would.
I hoped you would.
When you were compiling the data for your study,
Yeah.
you said ESL students. Strictly ESL, like ESL, traditional ESL.
Good question. Good question. I'm glad you asked that. I didn't plant her there, but you did ask the right question. All right. We have here at the university and all throughout our country, we have a population that we as linguists call Generation 1.5. Many of them are people who were born here. They may live in enclaves where everybody speaks their native language. They may go shop in their native language grocery stores, go to church in their native language. And they really don't speak too much English except when they get here. They may sound very good. They may speak without foreign accent. They may sound like they have background, but they're often lower socioeconomic status again, and if you begin to probe, you find that their vocabulary has deficits that they don't have. They're the ones who heard the 3 million words rather than the 11 million words. Some of them, also you find grammatical deficits. Some of them, if you ask somebody, are you a native speaker of English, or what's your native language, or what's your mother tongue? It's not an easy answer to that. There really isn't. If somebody asked me, what's your native language, I would answer without a doubt, English. I was born here, I was raised here, it's the language that I speak, the only language that I speak that comfortably. If they asked me what's your first language, I would say English. If they asked me what's your mother tongue, I would say Yiddish. It's a translation, Mama Lushan, from the language my parents spoke to me. I would answer differently. And we know for a fact that some of our students claim that they're native speakers of English or they're not native speakers of English, and it's